Hey, everybody, welcome to. Oh, Jesus. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Ethics of Singerhood, a podcast. Jesus. Hey, everyone, and welcome to the Ethics of Singerhood, the podcast where we get real about what it means to be a singer and all the hidden truths that nobody warned you about. I'm your host, Rachael, a singer, voice teacher, and someone who has spent a lot of time unlearning all of the BS I learned early on. Today's episode is called Bone to Pick, the Anti-Education of Singers, and I have so many thoughts on the matter. We are diving into what it's like to be taught by people who don't understand voice science, how the industry is built to chew you up and spit you out, and how so many of us are left to pick up the pieces in the aftermath. So if you've ever been in a voice lesson and been like, this doesn't make any sense, this one's for you. This one's for you. Let's get into it. So, as some of you may know, I went to college at Central Washington University, and I got my Bachelor of Fine Arts degree in musical theater. And you would think that that would mean something along the lines of 4 years of studying, you come out on the other end with a pretty clear idea of how to sing proficiently musical theater style. That was not really the case, and I'm sure anyone who has a related degree can relate to this kind of feeling that I'm about to express or the situation that I was in. So, um, most of the ideology around singing in my program was built on safe singing, and for the podcasters, I'm doing air quotes here. Safe singing, and safe singing was pretty much defined by not too low, not too loud, and mostly through your nose. And that was what we were kind of learning in college, which was really, really difficult to emulate all the time, and also made more contemporary music really difficult to sing. Um, Another thing that was a common topic of discussion was belting. I know, in a musical theater program, you'd think that we'd talk about it a little bit more, or at least understand what it was or what was happening in our voices when belting occurs. But the ideology was very much like belting is not safe, and you don't want to ruin your voice. So it was a lot of fear, I guess. For me, I was 19, 20, and it was my first experience in like a formal training program, and it was a lot of you should be worried, and you should figure out how to sing with the least amount of pain, the least amount of discomfort, which I think there is some truth to. But when you're just kind of learning to sing and the emphasis is like safety, 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 first of all, what does that even mean, in terms of what it actually means to protect your voice? Because I have a pretty clear understanding of what that means now, which we can get into later. But it was mostly like there was not a lot of emphasis on training, not a lot of emphasis on what practicing your songs actually meant and how to do it. And yeah, there was no training about belting, which was crazy because this was the era of Hamilton hitting Broadway, and then it was like the era of like, I don't know. I think Mean Girls was the big one that I remember from college being like, oh my God. Or maybe that was after college. I don't know. Anyway, lots of people belting their faces off, and me sitting in my apartment in Ellensburg going, if it's not safe, like, why can you make a whole career out of it? I don't know. I don't know. So it was confusing to say the least, and a lot of our program was emphasis on, you got to be a soprano, and I mean, like a diverse repertoire and like ability to kind of like use your voice in different ways is obviously useful, but when it came to kind of like honing in on what it was you were good at, like I was never really good at more like golden age style singing. I wasn't really a soprano. I'm not really a soprano. It's not really my thing. And every time I wanted to learn kind of like how to do like, more like Taylor Louderman style songs, there was just like no knowledge to be had from my professors. So there was also some really weird teaching things that I heard. Like there was a lot of weird like sing from your crotch. I literally had a professor say that to me. Sing from your crotch. First of all, there's nothing going on in there that has any effect on my ability or um yeah, my ability to sing. There's nothing happening there. Um my the lady who was teaching us to sing, she had three pillars of singing. I don't remember exactly what they all were, but it was like breath, resonance, and I want to say the third one was placement. Um, and that was all she said. That's all she wrote. Those were the things. Not too loud, not too high. That's a quote from her. Could I see? Could I see? Um, I also was going through a really big Donna Missile phase. I still am. I'm still in the Donna Missile phase. It's not a phase. It's a lifestyle. But I had just seen this crazy video of her singing Macklemore's song over it, and she's got this crazy voice and crazy vocal distortion that I was so obsessed with in college. And I took it to the voice teacher who was um, assigned to teach all the MTBFAs how to sing. And he was like, yeah, you could do this if you want to wreck your voice. So, another myth, distortion ruins your voice. It certainly doesn't. Again, there are people who have full ass careers doing this shit, man. Sounds like sounds like y'all just don't really know how to do that. So, again, wild for a BFA musical theater program that's supposed to turn you into something else. Um, Not to take the accountability off the students, there's obviously a thirst for knowledge and a hunger for learning that you got to have and sustain for 4 years in order to get what you came to get. But I mean, hear me out. There's lots of musical theater BFA programs, some of which are just like the gateway to Broadway, which is a whole different conversation. But people come out, with skills that they, maybe didn't have before they started. So I think a lot of people can relate to this experience, not just the people I was in this program with, but many, many people who learned to sing from potentially maybe not like a baby. My training in singing was very much in my like early 20s, and that's where I got all my information from. And maybe that's why it took so long to get here, but that's neither here nor there. Voice science is a relatively new thing. And I think there are definitely some programs that are so invested in making the program run, making the money, which is another thing we're going to get into. It's all about the money. And just making things function and less of a sustainable artistic lifestyle teaching, etc. I hope that made sense. But the emphasis on pulling them in, churning them out, pulling more in, churning them out. So, you know, I don't know how they vetted the people that ran this program, but you can Google, or I've Googled extensively what the lady's credentials were, the lady who was the head of the program, and she just doesn't exist on the internet. Which, like, fine, do your thing, but what? Yeah, what? Lots of confusion on my end and other people's end. So anyway, there's that. Um, so when I started taking voice lessons again, years after actually no, my first voice lesson after college was in New York City. A lady named Shanna Ray, shout out Shanna Ray. It was mind-blowing. I think I had one lesson with her about a bunch of songs that I was needing to be able to sing for a cruise ship. And once you have kind of like the right teacher and the right situation to like open up your brain to new possibilities and different sounds and different ways to make different sounds, oh my god, the possibilities are endless. I think I brought to her a Dolly Parton song, and then I always think of the Deluge in the Paper Cup. I forget what it is. Hey now, dream it's over. That one. In contrast to, I think, the Here You Come Again. About Dolly Parton. I brought her those two songs, and I was like, I am trained in musical theater. Which this was still a musical theater esque show that we were doing, but the transition from classical, not classical, but like a classic MT sound versus maybe a pop rock sound, or even just like a rock sound. I was really interested in that. I was really, really interested in getting some more texture and variety and color in my voice. And she gave me a couple new mechanisms to play around with that I had never ever thought of, that I can't quite remember now. But she had some really really good advice. Also, a female voice teacher for a female singer. Who's to say? Who's to say? Who's to say? Maybe there's something there. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. That changed the course of my auditioning from then on out. I learned kind of how to make belty sounds by sliding. I used a lot of sliding because I could slide into these crazy belts, but I couldn't quite hit them on the head. And at that point, I had kind of like written off. Well, before I saw Shanna Ray, I had written off voice lessons because I was like, whatever, if it's all the same as it was in college, then maybe I'm just kind of on my own for this one. And I was finding some pretty insane roadblocks of getting into this belting zone and then feeling fatigued or feeling pain or tension because I didn't really understand what was happening. But I was finally achieving these sounds without any finesse, without any control, without any real understanding or kind of style. It was just kind of like loud, and I was like, well, I can do it, but I don't know how I'm doing it. So I just was kind of like going into every audition room like so poorly prepared, which I think is my big beef with academia. I didn't feel prepared. I didn't feel prepared to go into this workforce. And when I got to New York City and started auditioning every day, oh boy, nothing was what I thought it was gonna be. So there's that story as well, I guess. I moved back to Seattle during COVID because New York City was not the place to be during COVID. And I started writing songs, and I started kind of running into the same issue over and over, doing self tapes and being like, why can't I get these notes? Like, why are they not feeling good? I'm having all this tension. It's causing problems, but I'm not going to stop singing because why would I do that? And I actually went to go see an SLP at Swedish who recommended me or referred me to go see Dr. Kari Reagan, who, if you know me and we ever talk about singing, you know that she rocks my world, man. She just does. um, she started teaching me and mentoring me really in the singing space of vocology, and I have learned so much about voice science from that lady. And she is actually the one who opened the gateway to teaching for me. So talking to her and my boss now, Angela McGann, who is also a wildly knowledgeable singer and teacher, I've learned so much about my voice as it is, as it was, and as what it can be. And she's pulled me into a lot of really great spaces like the NATS Circle, National Association of Teachers of Singing, which I'm a part of. What's up, what's up, what's up? So, and she hosts a conference here in May. May every year at UW. I forget what it's called, but I'll put it in the chat. I'll link it in the something, whatever. The information will be readily available. But it's a conference where basically a bunch of SLPs and voice scientists and voice teachers, they all gather and present on all different facets of the voice, which I'm actually going to get into in another episode because it's so fascinating. So but what I'm really trying to discuss here is the education of singers, the anti-education, if you will. I think when you're not holding your program, your structure, your education to a level of accountability then you are doing more harm than good. And I think it's a struggle for most people to access education in the arts. And so all these pretty words to say, I'm mad. Okay. I'm mad that my college program that I paid, hundreds of thousands of dollars for didn't really teach me the things that I'm learning now. So again, if you relate to this, the whole reason why I opened up Rock Fox was because I was learning so much, and it was angering. It was rageful to see all of these, like random stuff on the internet that's like sing from your belly. I mean, if you've looked at the Rock Fox, you know, content, then I'm not a fan of that at all. Because it doesn't mean anything. There's no meaning to it, and if there's no meaning, then what is it? Um, and I was feeling rageful about the stuff that I didn't learn in college. So it was like, okay, even if I've been teaching for 1 year and I've learned so much, like these are things that I know now that I can bestow upon people who are potentially hitting roadblocks, who are beginning their journey, who can start even in a place that is a little bit more knowledgeable and more educated than, kind of learning on your own, being self-taught. There's plenty of resources out there, and honestly, I just feel like I needed to make myself into one of them. Voice lessons can be really scary. It's hard to approach your education in voice sometimes. It's a deeply personal thing, and I think that that's also tied into it. It's a deeply personal thing, and so if you're going to teach voice to, a horde of BFA students, I don't know. Could be more personal, could be more goal oriented. It could, who's to say? Who's to say? Me, I'm saying it now. I'm saying it. I was attending this conference. I think it's the Northwest Voice Conference. There, I said it. Northwest Voice Conference. I was attending the Northwest Voice Conference, and it's so cool to meet people there because there are SLPs from all over. There are people who are in their PhD programs. There are voice teachers. There are students who are just curious and want to learn more. And I am particularly interested right now in vocal distortion. It's something that I am very passionate about and want to learn and want to get better at. And I'm going to shout out May Oskin. I've seen May Oskin speak twice now. I was on for her Nats chat about distortion in the spring, I think. And I was sort of pontificating with her over a lunchtime brewski about the anti-education of singers. Actually, I wrote this entire podcast idea while I was sitting there in the conference because I was like, there's so much stuff that people need to know. And May told me a story. I don't remember exactly what university she was talking about, but she told me this story about how I believe she was either called to talk to these students or was asked for help or something, but there was a program, a university program that was doing all pop rock musicals, and they were doing like distortion and belting and all this stuff, and a lot of these singers were having like injuries and problems. And um I was just talking to her about it, and she was saying that it's crazy that you would do all of this material without teaching the students how to properly do it first from like a scientific approach. And you know what, May, I couldn't agree with you more. Couldn't agree with you more. She's absolutely brilliant. Learning from her and listening to her presentations over the years has been quite enlightening. But she makes a really good point. If you're assigning this material to singers, whether it's American Idiot or Rock of Ages or a different thing, whatever it is, and Jesus Christ Superstar, even if you want these kids to be screaming and belting, and you're not really giving them the tools that they need, then we're kind of like perpetuating this industry of chewing up and spitting out, which brings me to my next point. The industry is wildly saturated. That's not brand new. That's not new news to anybody. um but the consequences of thrusting like young people into these insanely demanding roles, insanely demanding songs, they burn out without the proper education. I don't think it's intentional. I don't think we're intentionally not educating singers so that we can like keep the wheel going. But something I always think about is, you know, I talk about vocal hygiene in my lessons and on my Instagram. I'll talk about vocal hygiene here at some point. Um, but training, vocal hygiene, the proper education, voice science, all of these things are tied into really the longevity of your career. And if you're not kind of like worshiping at the altar of these things, then you're at a higher risk of, you know, burning out, which can be both physically and mentally, pushing yourself to and through these limits that you kind of are aware that, like, oh, my body's not ready for this. I don't know how to do it in a healthy way or an efficient way, or I'm thrown into this show 8 times a week and I'm not able to take proper care of my instrument because I don't even really know what the extent of that is. And usually you don't learn these things until you wind up with maybe even an injury or in voice therapy or something like that. That was my case. I didn't have an injury, but I was worried about something. And thank goodness the resources here are abundant. But I didn't learn a lot of these things until I was in a tougher spot. Um, Not to mention, as how personal your voice is not just attached to like the sounds that you make, but your personality, your aura, your feelings, and having something wrong with your voice and your self-expression and your communication can be so detrimental to everything. Truthfully, everything. To lose your voice, to have issues with your voice, it's personal, it's can be traumatic sometimes. And so taking better care of our instruments and teaching the younger singers or the newer singers how to do this is just paramount. So really it ties back into the beef with the anti-education of singers. What are we doing here, you guys? um Something that May and I also pontificated about was, I don't think either of us arrived at like a solution, but we were talking about somehow like creating some accountability for the the powers that be that employ the singers. So we talked about Broadway, which I'm a lover. I am a devoted fan. I love Broadway. That was my whole dream. That was my whole point. So not shitting on Broadway. I love Broadway. I love musical theater. There's nothing that could take that away from me. That being said, um, everyone's voice has different limits, and it's really, really wild to be in a scenario where you're auditioning with, hundreds and hundreds of other people a day, multiple times a day, for these really, really demanding roles. Now, I think that you can train. I think that obviously people do, and execute Broadway contracts with finesse over and over and over again. That being said, I couldn't tell you what the turnover rate is for every single role on Broadway, or swings or understudies or whatever it is, but I do know that if you can't do your job, um the beautiful thought is that there's an understudy who can fill in your role, and that's amazing, and everyone gets a job. But there's lesser tiered companies, there's lower tiered establishments and businesses and whatnot who um can absolutely just like next you to the next thing. So while I don't have a solution for this, I do feel like it's important to talk about, if you're someone who's trying to get into the Broadway world or musical theater or classical singing or whatever it is, even the rock scene, there are instances of this, if you're not being taught how to properly care for your instrument, then you know that experience is always available to you, the one where you get rejected over and over, or even get the job and then get cut or fired or whatever it is because your body can't make the sound that day or whatever it is. That experience is available to you no matter what you do, I'm sure. But being able to protect yourself and increase your odds of actually landing the job, keeping the job, sustaining your career, having the next job, I think is a really important conversation, because not until you're in the industry, in the world, auditioning, singing, teaching, whatever it is, you realize kind of how cutthroat it is, which I know that there's a time and a place to be cutthroat. I'm a total advocate for, um, you know, at least competing with the previous version of yourself. But when it comes to your voice, your instrument, your body, same with like an athlete, like it does need proper care and proper training. And so I'm a huge advocate for that. And when you come and take lessons at Rock Fox, that's what we're going to talk about. And you're going to learn all kinds of new shit and you're going to feel better and it's going to be awesome. Shameless plug. I have written down here Broadway and professional touring circuits as meat grinders, and I think that that is so funny and so true. Another thing I did want to talk about was on the in the same vein of burnout and auditioning and stuff. You know, they always say like auditioning is your job, and I've been out of this circuit for a couple of years now, so and things have changed. Awesome, but the way it was auditioning is your job, and this is a job that you don't get paid for, but you spend most of your waking hours doing. So, um, yeah, it's not only expensive, but it's exhausting, and that's the button on the Broadway conversation. So we've talked about what forms these habits, how to find yourself in a place where you're scared and worried about your voice. I do also want to touch on the consequences of the anti education of singers, which is, relatively something I'd like to keep blameless. Everyone has their own autonomy and is responsible ultimately at the end of the day for figuring out what is going to be best for them. Again, I'm a huge advocate for continued learning and education, so that's what we're trying to do here at the Ethics of Singerhood. But I do want to talk about something that's really real, and that's consequences of not taking care of your instrument or being taught something that is wildly incorrect, or struggling with your voice. There's consequences for that. So obviously there's exhaustion and fatigue, whether you're doing it right or wrong. If you're exhausted, if you're overworked, if you're burnt out, all that jazz, you're at risk of an injury. And I do have another idea for an episode that I'm currently writing about, vocal injuries. Are they unavoidable? Yes or no, maybe multiple answers here, multiple theories, multiple thoughts on that. But it is a real thing. Singers do get injured, and typically it's due to overuse, it's due to burnout, it's due to not taking care of the instrument properly, and that's a real consequence. And I think with that in mind, we can move forward from the fear based keep your voice low and soft and sing through your nose that I learned in college. I think we can be mindful of safe singing without instilling fear that using your instrument to its fullest extent is bad, because it's not. It's actually it usually ends up being more efficient and a lot easier for the singer. So shame is a consequence, and you know what, the consequence of shame is so hard. It's so hard and so personal, and a lot of singers feel that way because they feel that they can't do something that they wanted to do, or they can't sing a certain note, they can't sing a certain way, they can't sing in a certain register. But oftentimes it's due to bad teaching. Like, I don't want to say that again you don't have any responsibility, because you do. But bad teaching can really put you in a position. If you trust someone, a position of authority, with your voice, with your craft, with something you are trying to learn, and they've taught you all these crazy things that don't make any sense, it can be inhibiting. It can be difficult to get out of a space where, like, there are even some times when I'm singing on stage and like the flashbacks of college or whatever, they get into my brain, and I'm like, oh god, I was never meant to sing like this. And it's like, you know what, that's not true. That's not true, baby girl. You were meant to do it all. And I think that shame does stop a lot of people from their singing journey, which is a crying shame, truthfully, because singing is for everyone. Okay? Singing is for everyone. It's for everyone. Another consequence is having to retrain. And you know what? You're going to train and retrain and retrain and retrain and retrain probably your whole life, because your body changes. Um, this one's not really like that horrible of a consequence, honestly. It's kind of a blessing too, because to retrain is to relearn, and to relearn is to discover, and discovery is the whole point, I think, because at the end of the day, what we're shooting for here is not to replicate sounds or replicate things. The reason the greats are great is because they've got their own special thing. And you know what? You have your own special thing. And you only find that by exploring. And you know what? That's going to be that little bit right there. That's going to be the promo for this podcast because that's how I honestly feel. Um, so I guess my big question, and I'm so curious, and if anyone has any feedback or answers, drop me a line, dial the phone. I'd love to talk, or drop a comment, send me a DM. Why isn't voice science the standard in all singing education programs? That's my question. Whether it's musical theater or classical singing or just a voice major, whatever, why? Why? And you know what? Maybe it is in some, and you know what? Bless them. Doing the Lord's work, truly. Um, who does it benefit to keep singers uneducated? Conspiracy alert. Big Pharma. Just kidding. It doesn't has nothing to do with Big Pharma. I mean, maybe it does. I don't know. Drop drop your singing conspiracies in the comments. Send me a DM. But it does benefit the machine to keep singers uneducated. Again, I don't think it's intentional from educators. I don't think that's the intent at all, because like, who's gaining from that? But I think it does support a machine of overturning and making some of these jobs like wildly unethical. Shout out to summer theater contracts. What are they? Why are they? And who allowed that? Just kidding. Some of my best times were on summer contracts. But again, the ethics. We got to just be tuning into what we're being asked to do. Yep. And how much money we're getting paid for, which is usually not a lot. Last question. How can we shift the culture? Well, I'm doing my part by making this podcast. And hopefully, if I'm not either asking questions that you've never asked, answering questions, or just sparking thoughts and conversations amongst the people who absorb this content, I just want to pose the question. Sometimes just posing the question opens up room for a new community, a new way of things, and things are changing all the time. So yeah. I think that continuing the conversation is the best that we can do. And obviously, you can come in the studio, ask your questions, get some answers. What's a larynx and why does it? What's the word? Do what a larynx does. When's it your turn? It's your turn now, baby. It's your turn right now. If you're curious about singing, if you're curious about your voice, if you've got questions, if you've got answers, if you want to sing, if you want to pontificate, here's the place. I just want to make sure that anyone who has watched, who has felt like, oh, I can't sing, or I am broken, or I'm unable to do X, Y, and Z, you're not broken. You're missing some pieces, but the pieces are out there. The answers are out there. People sing every day at professional levels, at amateur levels, in their basement. There are bitches selling at Madison Square Garden. Why not you? Huh? Why not you? Why not you? We just need a friendlier world and a more educated baseline. So I am super excited to be having this podcast. You can visit my website. It's rockfoxstudio.com. You can follow me on Instagram at rockfoxstudio. And I hope you enjoyed this podcast. I hope you enjoyed my thoughts. Please don't hesitate to reach out. I would love to talk about anything that you would want to hear about. And don't forget to book your lessons for the fall, because anytime is a good time to get started. You're not too late. You're not too early. You're perfectly on time. Thank you so much for listening. Again, my name is Rachael, and I love you very much. And this has been Rock Fox Podcast, the Ethics of Singerhood, Episode 1, Bone to Pick, the Anti-Education of Singers. Okay. Love you. Bye.